I don't talk much about my job. And even with friends and family, I find myself not really knowing what to say because sometimes there are things that not everyone can understand, and this is why I came here. I'm pretty sure most of you will, and I thought you could also be interested in learning more about the place in which I work. You see, I'm a park enforcement patrol member. Basically, what I do is making sure, along with my colleagues, that the park is a safe and welcoming place to all visitors, and we also make sure that they follow our regulations. However, not all of our regulations appear on our website. This is for security reasons. So we must instruct visitors as soon as they arrive about our extra list of rules. Our park is a very nice place actually, and there are amazing sights and landscapes to look at, but this doesn't mean there are no dangers. As much as any other place in the world, there will always be some. So, this is the reason why you must be careful if you ever decide to come and visit us. I am not comfortable with revealing either my real name or the exact location of the park, but I promise I'll do my best to give you as many details as possible about the strange events that happen here. You see, our park is a very regular place, in fact. Our staff members and the visitors are not the only ones roaming here. For that reason, we also provide group tours to increase the safety level, because sometimes the rules are not enough. You know, some people just won't listen. They'll laugh about it, think of it as a joke, and then get in trouble. Only problem is that in most cases we find them when it's way too late to give a hand. I'll start from our very first rule. 1. Avoid the dogs. If they come at you, do not pet them and continue walking. Just ignore them. They can't touch you if you don't touch them first. Seems weird, right? What dogs are you even talking about, you may ask. Now, you must know that we don't allow any pets into the park to keep it clean, and this should act as a warning already. This in fact means they are not real dogs. My first encounter with one of them was unpleasant. I was still a newbie, so I wasn't alone, luckily enough. Otherwise, I don't think I'd still be here to tell you my stories. Me and my colleague, we'll call him Tom, were patrolling through an area that wasn't much popular among the visitors, probably because there is always a nasty smell in the air, like of rotting eggs. When I asked Tom, that had much more experience than me about it, he said they tried many times searching for the source without finding anything really concrete. We were walking down a pretty narrow path when all of a sudden a dog came out of the bushes. It looked kinda old and the fur was dark as coal and covered with dirt. Then, it started approaching us, wagging the tail. I tried moving towards it because I thought it was lost, but I felt an arm blocking me, and when I noticed, I turned my face to the left. I realized it was Tom, a scared expression plastered on his face. Don't move. Don't touch him. I was confused. I looked at the dog again, and then it looked back at me. I felt my heart jump. There was something unnatural in the eyes, something that I can't quite come to explain. I can only say that at that moment, something felt extremely wrong with it. Yet, the thing that looked like a dog didn't come too near us, and simply stood there, wagging its tail and looking at us, waiting. Then, I understood why Tom told me not to touch it. The thing couldn't touch us unless we touched it first. I stepped back, and so did Tom. A few seconds passed, but it seemed like we had been standing there for minutes. The dog then growled and disappeared into the bushes, leaving me and Tom finally alone. This was my first encounter with one of these quote-unquote dogs, but not the last. I've met them many times, and yet I've never managed to understand what they truly are. What I know, however, is that you must never touch them. How is it possible that our staff is aware about this? The following story was told to us, the new recruits, after we found out about their existence. Many of us didn't really understand the situation, so they started explaining where this rule came from. Once, one of the members of the old task, the park has been open since 2017 now, decided it was a good idea to pet one of them. When he did, he wasn't alone. There was another colleague with him, and they saw everything. We usually don't go patrolling alone, but rather in couples or groups. Back to the story. That colleague saw the dog suddenly standing up on two legs and getting taller and skinnier. And then, it devoured the man that touched it. It swallowed him whole, leaving the other poor guy in a pure state of shock and terror. When they found him, he was still shaking and he was as pale as a ghost. That is the end of the story. When they finished telling us the incident, I saw the other recruits sharing a worried look on their faces, but how could I blame them after all? Still, the dogs are not even the worst part inhabiting the land. Sometimes, humans are way more dangerous than the monsters we picture, but we don't know whether this is human or not. That is our second rule. 2. On the evenings, you might encounter a man with a screaming mask. If you see him, run as fast as you can. Do not let him get close. The park closes at 8 p.m., so this means that you may encounter him from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. During these hours, it is suggested to pay attention and do not isolate yourself. I was pretty disturbed by this one the first time I read it, and I still am. Most patrollers didn't meet him, thank God, but some of us did. And, unfortunately, as you might have guessed, I am one of those. Aren't I just blessed? As mentioned before, we usually go in couples or groups, but one day, I insisted to go patrolling alone one last time before the closing. And weird enough, I was actually granted the permission. I was walking through a very common area, which is a small clearing where families and couples usually have picnics. The wind was howling through the trees and the sky was painted in orange and red. I kinda zoomed out for a second, closing my eyes to the peaceful sounds of the nature, the chirping of the birds, the wind, and the cracking of the twigs. I opened them back quickly. It sounded like something heavy broke the twigs. I stood there trying to understand where the sound was coming from. The sound of a footstep. Careful footsteps. Then someone came out of the tree line. It was a man. He was very tall, and he was wearing all black from head to toe. A long coat with a hood, and big leather boots. He also had on a mask of what looked like a scream. A white long face with empty black holes where the mouth and eyes should have been. What alarmed me the most yet were his hands, stained in red. He was also holding what seemed like a hunting knife, and a dark red liquid was dripping from both. I didn't scream, I just ran, as fast as possible. I could hear him getting closer and closer, but I wasn't going to give up. The base was near. I just needed to resist a little longer, and then I would be safe. At one point while I was running, I didn't hear him anymore, so I turned. He was standing there half hidden by a tree, observing me. I looked behind. There were other patrollers there. When I looked again at the tree, he was gone. I ran to my colleagues and explained everything that happened. When they took me back to the base, my boss was mad. Of course, but decided not to fire me because I was a good recruit after all, and said I should use this as a learning experience. Never go alone patrolling. And in fact, I never dared to do it again. After this, they told me that this person was suspected for the disappearances of some of the visitors during the years. Well, actually, it wasn't a total disappearance because they had found all the bodies. When someone goes missing into the park, well, our squads and the police department go to the same spot, an old crooked tree, where the bodies are hanged, all bloody, and with all black trash bags on their heads. We know he's the one that killed them because, well, obvious reasons. Those who saw him and managed to escape all claimed his hands were stained in red, and that the liquid was from his knife, and it was fresh. We have no idea why, but we and the police never managed to catch him. It's like he disappears. And if you're wondering how many people usually go missing into our park, well, it's a pretty good number actually. Around 5 to 6 a month, I would say. We tell their relatives that they just disappeared or that they died in some sort of accident because the police, they don't really want to create a panic since the killer is nowhere to be found and there are too many bodied and 0 traces and clues. So yeah, I do not suggest that you go alone at any time in the park, but you should just not go alone in general. No matter if it's during a horrible headache, so I'll just head to bed. I will talk to you guys soon and share some more of the rules. I truly hope that you enjoyed my stories for the day. It's me, again, and today I'll share with you some more facts about the park. I'll try to update as much as possible, but I can't promise to post every day because my job here keeps me busy. I'll try my best not to disappear still. Also, I'm sorry for the small spelling mistakes in the title of the previous blog. My keyboard just goes nuts sometimes, and sorry for the eventual grammar mistakes too. English is not my first language, guys. This should give you an extra clue about the location of the park. If you remember last time we were talking about why it is recommended not going alone either during the daytime or the evening, I will start with our third rule now. 3. While walking, you might suddenly feel a bit dizzy. If you do, make sure not to sit down under a tree. You can sit where you want, but not under trees. What's with the trees, right? Well, actually we have no idea. We had many visitors claiming to feel like this at one point while walking, and most of them were alone when this happened. So this is why we suggest you are not alone. Also, those of them who decided to sit under a tree in that very moment were found asleep, but they wouldn't wake up for some reason. They were all taken to the hospital, but when arrived, they all had apparently fallen into a coma. Again, I honestly believe this is much worse than dogs or even the screaming man. That's how we name the dude now, because we never managed to explain this phenomenon. We know that the dogs are not real dogs and that the man may not also be a human, but yet this thing scares us more because we have little or no control at all over it. We can, as usual, just hope our visitors will listen to our advice. So yes, if you don't go alone, there's no possibility of this phenomenon. You might also wonder how we remain so calm knowing how many people actually die or disappear here, because yes, some people do disappear too, never to be found again, no matter how many times we try or where we search. Well, truth is, we try not to show it, and to be cold. I know it's not really nice, but it's the only way to do this job. We need to move on and to think about ensuring the visitors' safety, because even if we feel bad, it's our job to make sure that they don't. And we also have to make sure that they follow the rules. This, however, was just one of the many examples I could do about the situation. Another interesting rule that just shows how dangerous wandering alone through our park is the following. 4. If you suddenly hear a voice calling your name, but you came alone, absolutely do not turn around. Continue walking, but whatever you do, you must not, for any reason, look behind you. Me and my other colleague, Jessica, were patrolling together one of my ex-favorite areas, where there is a small waterfall. The view is amazing and surprisingly, not many visitors go there, so it's always peaceful. I said ex-favorite area because what happened next convinced me to never return to that area ever again. I love my job, but sometimes I wonder if I should leave it. There are some places that I always refuse to go patrolling unless we are in a big squad. The more people, the better. The higher the number of people in the group, the less unpleasant things happen. You know what I mean at this point. We were talking about something that I can't quite remember. Maybe it was fitness, but still, we kept our eyes open. We heard many things about the place from the oldest rangers, so we really didn't want to mess up. They told us many stories about the voice, yet we never heard anything going there, or at least not until that day. This was the first and last time I have ever heard the voice. It came like something in the wind, clear yet distant, and called my name. We froze. Jessica looked at me, and I remember the warning. So I didn't turn around. The urge to do so was strong still, so she had to hold my hand to comfort me and prevent me from doing something that I might have regretted. Then I heard it again. The voice continued calling me, so, in the meanwhile, I listened more carefully, concentrating on its sound. It just sounded so wrong. It sounded imitated. I simply knew it. I knew this thing was trying to mimic a human being. But why? Why was it doing that? Me and Jessica started walking faster in the direction we were facing, without ever looking back. But I swear that night, I still heard the thing calling me while I was in my bed before falling asleep. So yeah, I never went to the waterfall again. Now, we don't specify on our special rules list where those phenomena take place, because it would probably scare the visitors. But we still try our best to make sure they go out there safely. Now, I also feel like you would be interested in knowing other details about the park, especially about others of the special visitors. With the term special visitors, we refer about those who look like human but probably aren't and often appear in our park. They usually have specific locations, and this allows us to easily understand most of their patterns. However, we do not dare underestimating them. I already mentioned one in my previous blog, the Screaming Man. But there are others like him that may just be as dangerous. So here, I'll share with you another rule. 5. You may encounter a man dressed in a tan jacket, with a fedora and sunglasses who is sitting on a brick wall. If you see him, do not engage him in conversation. However, if he asks you for your name, lie. Do not tell him your real name. If then he asks you for your deepest desire, you shall not lie, because he will know. But if you lied about your name, he won't be able to harm you. I, thankfully, never encountered the man in the tan jacket, but I have witnessed another park security member who did. This is one of our best rangers, we'll call him Mike, so we were all pretty anxious to know what happened. Now this is an old one, but since you never heard about it, I think it's gonna be fine. Mike was patrolling an area that wasn't too far away from the main trails. He wasn't too far, but he wasn't too close, and he said that he was starting to feel a bit tired, so he sat down on a brick wall. We do have some brick walls in the parks, and even though it's not really my cup of tea, I admit they are useful to sit down on if there are no benches available. Mike was just taking a little break when he heard someone sitting next to him, and when he looked up, he opened his mouth in surprise. There was a man, but there was something weird about him. He was very tall and kind of heavy built, but not fat, and he was wearing a tan jacket, a fedora, dark clothes, and black gloves. He also had a very gray scarf and sunglasses on. The weird thing, though, is that they were in the middle of the summer, so it didn't always make sense. Why should someone wear such attire with the heat? Even I, as someone who is always cold, wouldn't dare wear that during the summertime. It just didn't make sense. Plus, he never heard this guy coming. He swore in his own soul that he didn't hear anyone walking, and that a few seconds before, no one was there. He told us that the man stared in his direction, like he was waiting for something. But Mike, creeped out, stood up and ran away. This is where his tale takes a sinister turn. He was heading back to his car that was in our parking lot that evening after a late shift, but when he took the car keys, he felt like he was being watched. Many people say that you will know if someone is observing you, and I believe this is true, because it's like your body is giving you a warning, much like a survival instinct. It was already dark. Again, we close at 8 p.m. So he couldn't really see much, because we don't have many street lamps and it's a natural place, and we try as much as possible not to ruin the Earth Paradise facade. He tried squeezing his eyes, and when they adjusted to the penumbra, he saw him. The man in the tan jacket was standing just a few meters away, watching. He immediately got into his car and left, but what happened during the next few days made him almost give up his job entirely. He claimed that the man started following him everywhere, daily. He would spot him outside his flat, looking at his windows, or when he was patrolling in the park, even when he was just going grocery shopping at the mall. The man in the tan jacket always stood there, emotionless, staring right at him through the crowd. Luckily enough, one day, all the tan jacket man's stalking activity ceased. We don't know if he gave up or simply got bored by it. But what scared us most anyways was the fact that there was no way the strange man could have known where Mike lived. Maybe he tracked him, or something like that. This is still a mystery, but maybe this is not even the scarier part about this special visitor. You see, before telling you Mike's story, I mentioned the special visitor's not being human, or at least that is what us, the staff, believe, because of something else he does. To be fully honest with you guys, I encountered only a few of them, and I'm very glad about it. So most of my stories regarding them will be from my fellow friends that happened to visit the park, and obviously never returned here again, and obviously my colleagues. After Mike's stories, we all agreed that it was better not to irritate this man, so we started, whenever we saw him approaching us, carrying on conversations with the subject he was surprisingly, nice about, and he was really well-mannered. Other rangers say, and they had great talks with him. However, the time for them to go kind of came. The man would always ask for what they desired the most. Bizarre question, right? Those who told him, along with their real name, started experiencing unpleasant events in their lives. Things would start going horribly wrong, and based on their final answer, it became a nightmare, full of pain. But don't think those who lied were safe. It has been proved that those who lie about their name and not about the last question are safe, while if you lie about the last question, he will get mad and you will start bleeding profusely and without apparent reason. Problem is, a few people died here because of that, and those are the things you can't easily forget. You can't forget about people dying and facing horrible endings, getting hurt and disappearing. We force a smile on our face and keep patrolling because we need money for food and to pay bills, but the truth is, we all really want to give up deep down. This place is just wrong. Also, I believe the man in the tan jacket can't hurt you if you don't tell him your true name, because based on legends, knowing someone or something's true name gives you power over them. Do you think this is true? I would like to know of your thoughts about the whole situation. I'm very happy that you guys are appreciating the things I have to share. I can't really talk about them with my family, so knowing that someone out there is interested about what I have to say and actually believes me is a relief. At least, I'm not in this madness alone. By the way, some of you mentioned that the rotting egg smell in the area could be like some sort of demonic activity, but to be honest, I'm not really sure about it. I tried asking other rangers, but they have no idea. I also tried with my boss, and again I received the same answer. I'll see if I can go back there and find something, because not because I'm stupid I guess, but I just need answers. I promise I'll be careful. In the next update, I'll tell you more about some of the other visitors too, and about a few more phenomena, if I get the chance. In the meantime, make sure you are safe, and that you don't go on adventures without knowing enough certain places. Well guys, I always try to keep my promises, so I went back to that trail again and gave a better look around. But before we head into the story, I would like to say that I'm astonished I got such positive feedback. It makes me so happy to hear that there are people out there who appreciate my effort in collecting and telling these events, and that can actually understand. Again, your support means a lot, and I will never say thank you enough. As I was saying before, I inspected that area but didn't find much, apart from the dogs. Though this time, they kinda stared at me. It's not that they don't stare at you usually, it's just that there was something in the way they were looking at me that screamed, "What are you doing?" but it looked more like a warning. I don't know how to explain it. I just felt that there was some sort of message, so I quickly went back to patrolling and minding my own business. Again, I tried asking other rangers, but no one really had any answers to give me. I also got a few messages regarding the dogs, and no, they don't stick to that area only. You could meet them wherever in the park. Just remember not to touch them for any reason, and if you have children, keep your eyes on them at all time, especially if you see the dogs approaching you. Because come on, all kids are like going to pet animals. And for God's sake, if they need to go pee, follow them and wait outside the toilets. Now, this may seem a bit too excessive, but you have no idea how many people go missing here. I told you the number of victims of the Screaming Man, but this doesn't mean that there aren't other people who die here for other reasons or go missing. In fact, the number is always increasing, so we must always be on alert. I don't know why they haven't closed everything already, so that nobody can't get hurt. It seems like there's a reason behind them wanting to keep it open to the public. Something here, I'm telling you, feels wrong and the police department knows, but they won't do a thing. It's like they both have some kind of deal of silence. Something happens to people. Everyone keeps their mouth shut so that it's always a tragic accident. No questions from newspapers or others. No need to close the park or admitting that they don't know how to do their job properly. Angers me, however. I'm the only one of the many rangers that are even trying to find answers, and all I can do is keep trying to keep visitors safe because I'm just a normal person behind this blog, not some sort of heroine, and I do need to survive somehow. It's not easy to find a job in my country, so I must resist. So again, make sure your children are always with you. Do not leave them alone. We keep saying this to people, but a lot will listen, so we often find ourselves searching for their children, without finding anything most of the time. And when sometimes we do find them, it's already too late. They're dead. It breaks my heart to know how many poor children's faces meet terrible ends here, but I have to pretend that I don't care, you know? I know it sounds heartless, but trust me, I've seen things that will stick forever in my mind, so it's best that I just cope with it this way and avoid thinking too much about it. I took part in a lot of search and rescue operations, so I have some experience. Especially when it comes to finding dead bodies and stuff like that. I guess I'm going to share another rule. 6. Always stay close to your children. If you happen to spot a small pale boy dressed with a blue sweater and barefoot, do not let your kids get close to him. It seems like the things that inhabit this park particularly enjoy to hurt children for some reason. This special visitor, though, preys on kids only, which simply makes it more dangerous in my opinion. It shows itself with the appearance of a small, pale, fragile 8-year-old boy, and this allows it to lure them away easier. It has some recognizable features such as brown short hair, a blue sweater, and having no shoes. I've never seen him, to be honest, but once, a guy I was working with, a poor scaredy cat newbie, I'm pretty sure he'll be leaving soon since you need guts for this job, told me that he saw this boy standing there and looking at some children who were running around a pretty popular area, one of the most frequented by the families for taking pictures and such. My colleague thought he was a kid who got lost, so we approached him, but when he turned, he met blank and white, dusty eyes, so we ran away in terror. This special visitor is allegedly the responsible one for many kids' disappearances and presumably their death. It has been going for a long time. Apparently, it's been seen going up to kids, taking their hand and leading them toward the woodland. I remember a case in particular, which still haunts me. Still have nightmares about it too. We had a 7-year-old girl disappearing one afternoon. Her mother said they were at the playground area, yes, we have that too, and that at one point, she lost sight of her because she was sitting on a bench and it was full of children. When she spotted her again, she was walking hand in hand with another kid, a shoeless boy, straight towards the woods. She tried to run and call her name, screaming to come back, but it was like her daughter couldn't hear anything, and then she disappeared among the trees with the other kid. When we went looking for her, we didn't think we would find her still alive, and in fact, we were right. She was found impaled on a long, sharp broken tree trunk, and was next to the waterfall like she fell from the roof and then got impaled. It was such a macabre sight that I had to turn my head. The blood was everywhere and her expression was of pure pain and mixed with fear. Some of us vomited, but how could I blame them? I don't really blame her mother either, because I can only imagine how painful it must be to lose your kid. We just couldn't tell her the hideous truth, so we said there was no trace of her. I felt so bad and so guilty that day that when I went home, I cried. We gave her false hopes, and this was one of the cruelest things you could ever do to a mother. I won't go on talking about this whole thing because it still makes me tear up, so I'll answer to some questions I got in my private messages. The dogs all look alike, and they are all very similar to black giant schnauzers, while the voice can only be heard on that particular path. Sorry for the confusion. Again, we do not specify where phenomena happens to avoid scaring the visitors. Today, by the way, one of my colleagues told me to call him, and so I did. At first, I was surprised about it because it's not like we talk much at work, not even when we happen to work together. His name is David, and he is one of the oldest among our ranks, which equals to a lot of experience in our field. A few hours after I went home, I heard my phone ring and I picked it up. It was him, obviously, and I was anxious to find out what made him call. It's not like I'm bad at my job, but I'm not one in the highest position, you know? So I didn't quite understand where his interest came from. Then he asked me about the blog and my heart jumped. How did he find out? Was I going to be fired? I mean, I still love my job because I like keeping people safe and because I also feel attracted to the unknown, and I didn't want to go apply for anything else. I started blurting out questions, but he managed to calm me down. He told me I wasn't going to lose anything. Instead, David wanted to help me out. He said he could tell me more about the park because he has been participating in a lot of search and rescue operations, and also because, thanks to being a longtime ranger, he has seen so many weird things and some scary things on top of that. When I asked David how he found out about the blog, I was surprised, because he told me he was actually trying to see if someone else had similar experiences, but he said he was glad about me sharing those stories, because people need to know what truly happens in the world and what dangers are actually out there. We talked for a while about the most random stuff, you know, the usual. Then, when we started talking about our jobs again, his tone changed. Listen, I read that you were intrigued by the man with the tan jacket. I know that it may be the one among the special visitors that sparks the more interest. However, you should not think too much about it. You'll end up calling his attention. David said in a yet calm but shaky voice, if that makes sense. At that point, I asked him what he meant, and he just
Right now, we're on our way to Alabama. I know it's been a few weeks since I've done another state, and I apologize for that. But I'm back, and now we're about to knock out another one. Alabama's a state full of mysteries, and apparently, sightings of strange and unexplainable things. Welcome back to the swamp, my friends, and welcome if you're new. Today I'm going to be sharing some creepy and allegedly true Alabama horror stories sent in by viewers just like you. As always, if you have a story that you would like to share, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. Before we jump right into these stories though, I just have to take a second to remind you all about Chilling. For everybody who doesn't know, I have been in partnership with Chilling for just under a year now, and I want to make sure you take advantage of the free trial if you haven't yet. Chilling is the new home of horror, and an amazing mobile app that allows you to do things that are just not possible on YouTube, with hundreds of amazing stories that are sorted into curated playlists or playlists you can make on your own. Chilling is entirely flexible and customizable. Chilling also offers its one-of-a-kind ambience menu. You can change the ambience of the background noise or music at will anytime you'd like without interrupting the story you're listening to. You can adjust the volume, you can even darken the screen, you can even download stories for offline listening. We cannot forget that Chilling offers over 800 stories, hours upon hours of content from monsters, gore, paranormal, thrillers, true stories, and more. And this is all completely and utterly ad-free. That's right, no pesky ads to interrupt your stories. So what are you waiting for? Come join me, Mr. Creeps, Let's Read, Being Scared, and many more of your favorite horror narrators on the Chilling app. Start your free trial today. It's only $2.99 a month after that. Oh, one last thing. The Chilling app is currently giving away an Xbox X bundle, which includes an Xbox disc version, an additional wireless controller, Resident Evil Village, and Elden Ring. You can find details of how to enter this giveaway with the link in the description down below. About 10 years ago, I was a heavy drug user living in a medium-sized city with a very high crime rate in Alabama. I was staying with some fellow users in a rundown, seedy apartment in the ghetto, next to a halfway house. I'm also not some great big guy. I'm 5'6" and weigh 140 pounds now, and back then when this happened, I was barely breaking 100 pounds. Anyways, it was around 3 or 4 a.m. one night when I ran out of cigarettes. There was a 24-hour convenience store a couple of miles away from where we were staying, and I didn't have a ride at the time, so I figured I would just walk. I had gotten maybe a little over a quarter of a mile from the apartment when I heard a car creeping up behind me. I kept on walking, waiting for it to pass, but it kind of just idled slowly behind me. Now, as I said earlier, I wasn't in a very good life situation at the time and had either had dope or paraphernalia on me. So I was paranoid that at any second I would see blue lights or hear a siren and I would be busted. Finally, my curiosity got the best of me. I glanced around and saw that it was not a cop, but an older model Oldsmobile Cutlass. Alarms started going off in my head and I found myself suddenly wishing it were a cop. I started walking faster and the car pulled up beside me. I looked over and saw the passenger side window was down, and there looked to be two cracked out looking guys, probably in their late 30s or early 40s, just kind of watching me. I was just about to take off running through someone's yard when I looked over and saw a flash coming from the passenger side window. At first I thought I had gotten shot, but then it occurred to me that it was the flash of a camera. Before I could process what had just happened, to my relief that car took off. My comfort was short-lived though. A little way up the road I saw that car had pulled up into a parking lot and parked facing me. I stopped in my tracks, looking at it and trying to decide what my next move should be. When I saw the car start to back out and head in my direction, across the road to my left, there was a cemetery surrounded by a wrought iron fence, which I first attempted to climb, but I couldn't make it over the sharp points at the top. So I jumped back down and ran across the road to an old abandoned field that used to be the local fairground. I had turned a corner before I jumped the chain link fence to get into the field, and fortunately the guy in the car didn't see which direction I went. I hunkered down in some tall grass and lay flat on my stomach for what seemed like forever, but was probably around a half an hour, just watching the car creep up and down the road. Eventually I quit seeing the car, and I assumed they had given up on me, so I got up and dusted myself off and called a friend to come pick me up. No way in hell was I going to risk running into them again. So my friend showed up and gave me a ride to the store, and on the way back, right past where the first car got behind me, I looked down this old driveway to an abandoned house, and sure enough, there was the Oldsmobile, just ominously sitting there. I never ran into those guys or saw that car again, but then again I never really walked around after dark in that neighborhood again. I've racked my brain trying to figure out what their intention was and why they would take my picture, but I've never quite figured it out. If they hadn't been so cracked out looking, I would have considered they were just concerned citizens looking out for the neighborhood, since I too was extremely cracked out looking. But they were way too menacing for that to be the case, and if it was, why didn't they just call the cops? I'm also curious to see that photo, just as a reminder of how far down the gutter I was at the time, but not curious enough to seek those guys out. Anyways, thank you for sharing my story. This story takes place in the summer of 2017. My name is John. I live in a rural part of Alabama, but choose to work in the city. The drive is about 45 minutes or so depending on traffic. However, by the time I pick up my son from the sitter, get dinner, and get home, I've been in the car for about an hour and a half. My house is surrounded by trees and the neighbors are few and far between. It can get pretty lonely out here, but I enjoy the privacy. One evening, I pulled into my driveway and noticed something odd. The doors on my storage shed were wide open. I told my son to sit in the car as I got out to investigate. I didn't see anything missing and closed the doors back. I know the wind had not blown them open because it had 2 latches that must be open to get in. The next day, I looked around and much to my dismay, 2 weed eaters along with a few other garden tools were missing. I know I should have contacted the police, but I knew there wasn't much they could do at that point. Throughout the week I had some time off and decided to tackle some yard work that I needed to get done, which included cutting down a medium-sized tree that had grown next to my house. Once I cut it down and took everything out, I had to move it to the edge of my property, just inside the woods. I planned on cutting it up another day. Fast forward to the next Friday, I left work at 7 p.m., picked up my son, and we arrived home at around 8:30 p.m. As I pulled into the driveway, my son and I noticed something laying across the driveway. It looked as if a tree branch had fallen across my driveway. As I drove up to it though, I thought to myself, there are no trees over my driveway. Once I looked down and really got close to it, my heart sank to the bottom of my stomach. It was the tree I had cut down the other day. I had put it clear on the other side of my property until I could cut it up. I recognized the marking from my chainsaw. I didn't know what to do. My son and I sat there in silence for at least 5 minutes. I rolled the driver and passenger side window down just to get an inch closer and listen to hear if anything was out there. I didn't hear anything. I then realized for me to get to my house, I had to get out and move the tree. I told my son that I was going to get out and move it, just enough so that we could get past and I would lock the doors. If anything happens, he could use my phone to call the neighbor who lived the closest. I darted out of my car and moved the tree slightly out of the way. and raced back to my car. I was terrified. Luckily, my son was on the ready to unlock the doors for me to get back in. I drove toward my house and we got in safely, and I didn't sleep much that night. The next day I woke up to find the tree was moved again, this time a few feet behind my car. To this day I'm still baffled at who or what could have done this, or what their intentions were. Next time I will be smarter and call the police. I do have another question that I cannot answer though. How did someone know where I put the tree after I cut it down? Whoever had done this had been watching me. I had put the tree in the woods. The thought alone, enough, is keeping me up sometimes. It has taken me a while to write up this personal experience for you, mostly due to just being busy with other things. Though I will admit it's also due to a bit of fear. Not that you would bother me about the story, but about invoking other things to come back into my life. While I won't give you the specific location details, I suspect that a little investigation would lead you to the location. I cannot stress this enough. Do not contact the current owners. Just don't. From shortly before I was born until sometime in the mid-90s, I think 92 or 93, My grandparents lived in a small town outside of Selma, Alabama. The town they lived in was rather well known, due to having several antebellum mansions in it. One such mansion was my grandparents' home. The property had been abandoned and largely forgotten by the time my grandparents had bought it in the 1970s, and my father spent much of his free time restoring the home. I cannot say specifically how long, but I know that it had been empty for at least a decade at the time of purchase. It took my dad and grandfather several years of working on their own to restore the home, as well as adding some new modern fixtures and other upgrades. My grandmother, for her part, filled the home with various antiques, most of which dated around the period of the home. Due to its age, the home was on the historical register, and would later, after they sold it, be turned into a bed and breakfast, though I don't think it is such now. Whatever the case, paranormal experiences seemed to happen weekly there, even during when my grandfather and father were restoring the home. Some stories I remember offhand were his seeing something white and see-through sweep across the front hall one night while they were working on the property. They made sure to double-check everything before locking up, but they never did find anything. He passed it off as the wind catching a painting drop cloth, though he would admit reluctantly there was no wind, and he had not started painting quite yet. My grandmother related hearing footsteps come halfway down the main staircase one day while she was on the hall phone, only to have those steps turn and go back up the stairs slowly. Doors would randomly lock and unlock themselves, various things getting moved around or just went missing in general, and there was an overbearing sense of just being watched in the home at all times, especially in one room at the corner at the top of the main staircase. That room, at the top of the stairs, was the center of the most activity, even though the last owner, an elderly woman, had died in another room. Personally, that room always bothered me. I always felt like something was watching me from it. Something was angry that didn't want me there. Only if the door was closed, could I walk past it. Otherwise, I would go out of my way to simply avoid being there at all. There were 2 staircases that led down the hallway and downstairs. My half-brother related a story from around when I was born, when he was checking the property for my dad one afternoon. While walking around outside it, he stated that he got the distinct feeling that he was being watched. Looking up at the darkened house, he saw the face of an old man staring back at him from a window. The window happened to be in the room which I had problems with. After the property sold, I spent a week at the bed and breakfast in 2000. I specifically told the owner to put me in any room other than the one at the top of the stairs, to which they stated they had quit renting it out anyway. The door was now permanently locked, from what they seemed to say. Apparently they had numerous people who, after renting that room out, would simply check out and leave. None would give a reason for their sudden departure. While I stayed there, I spent most of my time visiting people who I had kind of grown up with and such like that, though we had moved away when I was just a child. We did still go back on a regular basis. We saw some places in Selma, when my father had worked, and only returned to the house to sleep. One afternoon, maybe a day or so before I was set to leave, I sat down to dinner with the host and hostess. The conversation turned to my history with the home, and some of the strange experiences I had over the years. When the subject came to the room at the top of the stairs, and what my half-brother had personally witnessed, the host and hostess shared a look of absolute disbelief before the man cleared his throat. He said that what I told them was on par with what they themselves had experienced, though they noticed that they believed that they knew why the disturbance had originated. During landscaping work in the rather large, about 5-acre backyard, they were forced to cut down one of these ancient oak trees that were there. In the roots of the tree, they found the remains of an unmarked grave. This prompted further investigation, upon which they discovered no less than 6 more unmarked graves there. The remains were moved to a local cemetery, but were quite badly beat up. And while they wouldn't, and they refused to go into detail, tell me much of what they found there outside of that, They did make it quite clear that it was their belief that the unknown cemetery was directly tied to the spirits that were in the home. They also related one final ghost experience that makes me smile. I know this is the kind of thing that shouldn't, but it does. They note that the large barn which my grandfather built, it wasn't original to the property. It was apparently haunted. However, the ghost seems to just come and go on its own free will, and hasn't really done anything overly spooky. Rather, from time to time, people in the barn have noticed a distinct sound of old country or gospel music that sounds like it's being played on an old record player that seems to be centered around a small office located in the interior of the barn itself. The reason this makes me smile, well, that wasn't an office. My grandfather had built that little room, put a small cot in there, and a record player, where from time to time he would take a nap while listening to his records. He was the happiest when he was puttering around in his barn, usually with my grandmother at his side, while listening to those records of his. I can't help but feel that now that he has passed on, he went back to the old home he was happiest at. I guess it goes without saying he and my grandmother didn't want to sell the old home. Some of the family effectively forced that to happen, and, well, the fact that my grandfather and grandmother didn't live long enough after it sold makes me seriously feel the sale was directly tied to them dying in some manner. Now, as I said, as far as I know, the place is still very active on the haunting side. It is also a private residence now, so you might as well have a general idea of where the home is, but by no means you should not contact the current owners. I haven't done so since 2000 myself, and I do not know if it's still Airbnb or not, and even if it is, I doubt the owners would want to become a ghost attraction. Anyways, thank you so much for sharing my story, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Let me start off by saying that Alabama is a weird and wonderful place. Sure, we have a sort of redneck vibe going on, but the state is actually a very beautiful and nice place to live in. The state is no stranger to paranormal events, especially in the UFO and alien category. An example of this is the Falkville Metal Man. Interesting story there. Anyways, this experience came from my sophomore year of high school. At the time, movies like Guardians of the Galaxy and Interstellar sort of put my interest into space. I would periodically lay out in my backyard, listening to music, and gaze up at the stars. Just sitting there imagining what goes on up there, just relaxing. Occasionally, I would see a moving star, but would always attribute those to planes. Except, this one star was far off from a plane, and I, for some reason, just kept my eyesight on it. It was going west, when suddenly, it instantly changed directions at a 90-degree angle, then started going south. I was confused, so I kept staring at it. A few seconds later it changed directions instantly again, and this time it was going west. Only after it changed course it revealed itself to not be a star. Something appeared behind the star. It was oval-shaped, glowing orange, and was massive. It made no noise, and started glowing extremely bright. I sat there in disbelief and kept my gaze on it. It looked like, upon further examination, that the star was in front of some sort of aircraft. It silently moved across the sky over my house and then suddenly just disappeared. The star was still there, and it was still moving. I was sitting there intrigued, hoping the craft would glow again, but the star soon faded into the night sky and disappeared itself. I ran inside and asked my family if they saw anything, assuming they would be considering the thing in the sky was glowing extremely bright. However, none of them saw anything. I wrote this down in my journal, which I had used to recall all sorts of weird paranormal events that I either research or experience. What makes the story weirder is that an hour later, military aircraft were out all over the sky. I don't know if that's normal, and we do sometimes see airplanes fly over our house, but never this many. There were dozens of airplanes, all seemingly scanning the sky. I've never told anybody what happened. My friends wouldn't believe me considering I come from a conservative environment, where people would scoff at the idea of anything outside of Earth. I still don't know what I saw that night, but I'm pretty sure it was a UFO. So some backstory. My grandparents live in an antebellum mansion in Alabama. We would travel there on a rather regular basis whenever my dad had vacation time or I was at a school. From time to time, my father and grandfather would head down to the back roads, or just various places, and just go for fun car rides. It was interesting and relaxing, and we just talked all kinds of random stuff while exploring these very rural areas. A couple of times we would go to the old Cahaba to wander around the abandoned city. In any case, on one such ride I remember we had turned down this one back road and were coming up on the railroad. I loved and still do love trains, so naturally I was hoping we would see one. As we approached the crossing, there was no train. The car bumped across the grade and started down the other side, when I noticed something on the left side of the car. Looking out, I saw something that I can only describe to this day as some sort of demon. Across the tracks and back in the weeds there was an old wooden train station. The station looked to have seen better days, being severely run down and dilapidated. At the far end of the platform there was a tall wooden water tower, and just in front of it sat an old wooden boxcar. I remember talking about that with my parents and everyone in the car, but apparently I was the only person that saw it. I even drew what I saw when we got home, but no one else remembered seeing anything of the sort. Years later, after my grandparents sold the old mansion and moved to Florida, I found myself taking a vacation in the old area. I wanted to see the old mansion again. It had become a bed and breakfast at this point, and to explore my old stomping grounds. I spent several days just going around and recording various places for my parents, as well as doing some personal ghost investigating. I did everything I could to track down the station, took a near infinite number of back roads, and not once could I find it. I even headed to Selma to check out the city's records, but even then I couldn't find any such evidence of this station. This place stood out in my mind. Even now it stands out. I know what I saw. I know that there was some sort of demon crouched in those reeds outside of that station with red glowing eyes. I know there was something there. This, as well as a few other details I've not listed here, puts the existence of that station somewhere between 1865 and the early 1900s. I don't know. I definitely know I saw it, and maybe it's one of those things that travels through some sort of dimension. One thing I was able to see is that there was a train station demolished 30 years prior to me even being there, and what I don't understand is, how would I be able to see the ghost of some sort of building? Is that even a thing? Thanks for listening to these creepy and allegedly true Alabama horror stories. If you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to hit that like button, as it helps me out a ton. The more likes this episode gets, the more YouTube promotes it, and that's very helpful to the swamp. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us? Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a new episode, as I upload them nearly every single day. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify, be sure to give this a 5-star rating over there, as it helps us a ton. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future episode, whether it's a story from your home state or something different, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp.